Glenn Scobey Warner was born on April 5th, 1871, in Springfield, New York. He was the son of a cavalry officer in the Civil War, and his mother was a school teacher. He played baseball in his youth and was known as a skilled pitcher. Warner was a large child who grew to be a very large man. His size in his youth earns him the nickname Butter, about which he says, "That name clung to me from the day I struck town until I graduated from high school." He describes himself as timid, awkward, overgrown, and fat, and that he was picked on by the town kids for quite a while. He also includes a story about him whipping the town bully. From My Life in Football, Chapter 1, which was a 60-chapter book printed in the newspapers in 1927 and 1928, Warner says, "I will never forget the first time I had the spunk to retaliate upon my tormentors. Coming from high school, a town bully snatched off my hat, threw it in a mud puddle, and stamped on it. And right there ended my passive submission to further persecution at the hands of my boyhood associates. I gave him a good licking, with the other kids looking on in open-mouthed astonishment at my sudden change of front. That battle showed me the way, and after a few more youthful scraps, I was held in respect, befitting my size and strength by the other boys." Now, when I read that, I think of Ralphie in the movie Christmas Story. Warner wasn't exposed to football until he was into his 20s, and from there went on to become one of the greatest early innovators in college football history. You may know him better as Pop Warner, and this video is about his origin story and his life in college football. I'm John Johnston, and this is Hardcore College Football History. At 19 years old, Warner graduated high school and his family moved to Wichita Falls, Texas, as they had bought a ranch. He got a job assisting a tinsmith, where he learned how to use tools to make things like cups, teapots, baking pans, and lanterns. He was very artistic, especially at watercolor painting. These skills would serve him throughout his life. In 1892, he returned to Springfield, New York for a vacation, but he ends up playing in a baseball tournament, and by chance, he visits Buffalo, where a horse racing series was in town. Warner is convinced he has a system for winning by wagering small sums on each race and allowing the cash to accumulate slowly, rather than betting large sums to get rich quickly. "I won $50 and straight away jumped to the conclusion that I knew everything there was to know about horses." You can guess what happens next. He had earned a fair amount of money from being a tinsmith, but he lost nearly all of it betting on the races, and now he was broke. "I dared not write to my father and tell him I was broke. I would have to explain what happened to all the money he knew I had when I left home." His father had wanted him to attend law school. Warner comes up with a plan to tell his father he is attending law school. He sends his father a letter with a catalog for Cornell, telling him he needs money to help pay for school. His father responds by sending him a check for $100. He decides to enroll at Cornell as he has the money to do so. And it's this plan and decision that changes his life. "My sudden decision to enter Cornell was caused by the result of a horse race, which shows again what seemingly trivial things may change a person's whole life," he observed. "I had no thought of going to college when I finished high school, but what I considered at the time a great misfortune turned out to be the luckiest thing that ever happened to me. I probably would have never gone to college, but not for that turn of the wheel of fortune." It's at law school at Cornell where he becomes known as Pop because he was one of the oldest students at Cornell. The nickname sticks with him the rest of his life. He played as a guard for 3 years. In his final year of playing in 1894, he was a postgraduate and was named captain of the team. Cornell went 6-4-1. As an alum, he came back to help Cornell coach, and it was here that Warner came up with his first original play. 3 backs who normally protected the rusher would fake a run to one side, Well, the quarterback kept the ball and would hand it to the runner, who now had an open field to run through to the other side. It was the first type of misdirection play in the history of football. His coaching career began at Iowa State, and in a bizarre manner, he actually coached Iowa State and Georgia in the same season. That worked because Iowa State began its season in August, and as the Iowa State season went from August until the second week of September, then he headed to Georgia and began coaching at Georgia. That was in 1895. In 1896, he does so well at Georgia that he's invited back to his alma mater. 1897 and 1898 he spends at Cornell. In 1898, the team goes 10-2, but he ends up in a political battle with an assistant coach and ends up resigning, at which point he goes to Carlisle, the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. Here he has to coach differently than he has in the past, and it's at Carlisle he is most innovative. The players at Carlisle were smaller than everyone else they played. Their teams typically have only 12 to 15 players, which means they don't have nearly as many substitutes as other teams. These are a problem at the time when the game is about brute force. Under Warner, the Indians relied on speed and agility instead of size and physical force. In 1899, Carlisle went 9-2, and their two losses were to Harvard and Princeton, but they beat Penn 16-5, and at the end of the season, the school played Columbia at the Polo Grounds in New York City, defeating them 42-0. The Columbia game was the first time that anybody ever saw the three-point stance as it was used by Carlisle's running backs. Before Warner came up with the three-point stance, backs would basically bend forward with their feet apart and their hands on their knees. Warner switched them to a stance that was more used by sprinters, and it helped them use their speed and agility. From 1899 to 1903, Warner builds Carlisle into a force to be reckoned with. They play a lot of games on the road against the best teams in the nation, and they become a fan favorite. Everyone wants to see Indians play football. In 1903, Carlisle is playing Harvard and winning. Unheard of. Warner decides it's time for a trick play. On a kickoff, the returner catches the ball, and the Indians formed a circle around the returner. The returner had an elastic band around the waist of his uniform, and the ball is shoved up behind his back. All of the players scatter, and each one of them act like they're carrying the ball. The Harvard players can't figure out who has the ball. It's more confusing because the returner is running with both hands free. He eventually scores a touchdown. Carlisle extended its lead to 11-0, but Harvard comes back in the second half and wins 12-11, mostly because they're much bigger, they have more players, and they just wear down the Indians in the second half. That's typical of football at the time. The hidden ball trick lives on forever, deserving of its own video. Warner goes back to Cornell in 1904. He feels slighted as Major Richard Henry Pratt, the superintendent of Carlisle, doesn't support him in reprimanding one of his players. He will regret his decision to leave and will be back at Carlisle 3 years later. Warner's 3 years at Cornell were mostly nondescript, and although the 1906 campaign featured a single loss to Princeton, he leaves again for Carlisle, feeling that Cornell doesn't place much emphasis on athletics. He will not be the only coach that makes this complaint, as Gil Dobie makes the comment, "You can't win games with Phi Beta Kappas," when he leaves in 1935. Warner will write in My Years in Football, "It seems worthy of note that in some 30 years of coaching football, the only place where I had unpleasant years was at my own alma mater." Somewhere around 1906 and 1907, Warner invents what is initially called the Carlisle formation by Walter Camp, but later becomes known as the single wing formation. For many, it is the birth formation of modern football. Note the unbalanced line. From Sally Jenkins, The Real All-Americans. Camp would dub the new scheme the Carlisle formation, but later it would become known as the single wing for its winged shape appearance. Whatever it was called, it was a bolt of inspiration. It was predicated on one small move. Warner shifted a halfback out wide to outflank the opposing tackle, forming something that looked like a wing. but it opened up a world of possibilities. Its beauty lay in its many options and disguises. They could show one thing and then do another. They could line up as if to punt and then throw. No one could know whether the Indians were going to run, throw, or kick out of the formation. The forward pass had been legalized in 1906. Very few used it because it was incredibly restrictive. If you threw the ball and it was dropped, it was a turnover. The rule would stay that way until 1910. Still, Warner and the Indians were masterminds of deception and stretching the rules as far as they could possibly go. An example from Pop Warner, A Life on the Gridiron, regarding a victory over Chicago in 1907. Fed up with seeing his ends getting mugged every play, Warner devised a plan. Taking a break in the action, he called Exendine and Hauser to the sideline and explained what he wanted them to do. When play resumed, Hauser took the snap, and Exendine, instead of charging straight ahead as he normally did, ran directly toward the sideline. Hauser dropped back to pass and, per Warner's instruction, held onto the ball a few seconds longer than usual. Exendine, by this time, had disappeared from the playing field. He ran behind the throng of players and spectators lined up along the bench and re-entered the gridiron about 25 yards downfield. By now, the Chicago players had forgotten about Exendine and were focused on Hauser, who was nanoseconds from being smeared. Just as he was about to be hit, he heaved the ball in Exendine's general direction. Warner, Stagg, and some 28,000 others watched in rapt anticipation as the ball soared through the clear November sky. Then the solitary figure of Exendine, sprinting toward the goal line, came into view. The ball settled into his arms at the 30-yard line, and the All-American jogged into the end zone untouched. Stagg was livid, but there was no rule at the time rendering a receiver ineligible upon leaving the field of play. Touchdown. Warner had outsmarted one of the greatest minds of the grid world. Carlisle won 18-4, spoiling the otherwise perfect season of the eventual Big Ten champions. Few things, said Warner, have ever given me greater satisfaction than that Chicago victory. Warner's second run at Carlisle from 1907 to 1914 results in some of the best teams of that era, and it might be the best story in the history of college football. You can see their records throughout the years, and note that in 4 of those years they only lost 1 game each year. In 1914, you have a disaster where their faith in Warner disintegrates, and they become a truly terrible team. Warner takes the Indians to new heights, producing their best teams and succeeds in knocking off some of the best teams in the nation. It's possible they could have been awarded a national title in 1911, but the NCAA recognizes Princeton and Penn State instead. One has to believe that the powers that be would have never recognized Carlisle, because they don't really fit with the rest of the colleges. They're not a college per se, but they're definitely not a high school either. There are constant complaints about professionalism and eligibility, and there are a lot of people who resent Carlisle's success. They must be cheating, otherwise they wouldn't be so good. We see the same stuff today. Warner's teams produced several All-Americans, including a man that might be the greatest athlete that ever lived, Jim Thorpe. Thorpe has reached mythical status, and it's difficult sometimes to tell what is myth and what is real. This is an entire subject of its own, so I'll give a really rough rundown of Warner's dealings with Thorpe. Warner convinces Thorpe to compete in the Olympics in 1912. Thorpe makes history in the Olympics, winning gold in both the pentathlon and decathlon. After the Olympics, he's charged with professionalism because he had played professional baseball over the summer. This was fairly common at the time, but most players used false names. They could make some money playing pro sports over the summer, then return to college and play football, and nobody would be the wiser. What Thorpe could have used to get him out of this situation is a champion, someone to be on his side, someone with a reputation to support him publicly. But that's not what Warner does. Warner and Superintendent Moses Friedman feign ignorance that they'd never known Thorpe played professional ball. Warner writes a letter to the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, and has Thorpe copy it, basically stating, "I hope I will be excused partly by the fact that I was simply an Indian schoolboy, and I did not know all about such things." It doesn't work. January 1913, Thorpe is stripped of his medals and publicly embarrassed. His amateur career is over. He goes on to play professional sports after that. But this is essentially the end of Carlisle Indian football. From the Real All-Americans by Sally Jenkins. The Carlisle football team was angered and disheartened by Thorpe's disgrace. To Thorpe's teammates, it seemed like he had taken the fall alone, with no one to defend him, while the two men who should have stood by him, Warner and Friedman, who was superintendent of Carlisle, had affected ignorance and went uncensured. There was a deep discontent with Warner in the locker room, even as the Indians went on to a 10-1-1 record in 1913. To top that, Warner bets on his own games. He's confident of victory against Dartmouth, so he bets $300 on his own team. When they fall behind at half, his halftime speech is to offer them a cut of his winnings of $500 should they win. They go out and blast Dartmouth in the second half and win 34-10. But by now, the Indians are hostile towards their head coach. They show it in his final season at Carlisle, as the 1914 team goes 5-10-1 and gets outscored 207-125. Warner, knowing his days are over at Carlisle, looks for his next landing spot. Carlisle plays Pittsburgh on October 17th. With 10 games left on the Indian schedule, Pittsburgh asked him to coach for them the next season. Warner spends the next 9 years at Pittsburgh. He will go undefeated his first 3 seasons, winning a national title in 1916. Pittsburgh isn't selected in 1917 for a national title because Georgia Tech went 9-0, demolishing everything in their path. The Golden Tornado beat 9-2 Penn 41-0, but Pittsburgh could only beat them 14-6. The nation clamors for a game between Pitt and Georgia Tech to play for a real national title. At first, the faculties are opposed, but Georgia Tech's faculty relents. They issue a challenge to Pittsburgh, but Pitt declines. In 1918, Warner wins another national title with a 4-1 record. It is a shortened year because of the World War I and the Spanish flu epidemic. Warner can't quite garner the success of his first 4 years for the rest of his 9 years at Pittsburgh. In early 1922, Warner signed a contract to coach at Stanford University starting in 1924 after his Pitt contract ended. That sounds a little weird, doesn't it? 2 years ahead of time you sign a contract? Warner cited health concerns, a pay raise, and Pacific Coast football's rising status as a reason for the move. Pittsburgh's harsh weather left him in poor health, making the coast's climate preferable. He has great success at Stanford, winning a Pacific Coast Conference title in his first season. He coaches against Newt Rockne in the 1925 Rose Bowl, losing 27-10. His 1926 team goes undefeated, ending up in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. They give up a touchdown in the final minutes after Alabama recovers a blocked punt on the Stanford 14. The game ends in a 7-7 tie, and both teams are declared national champions. The 1927 season included a win over rival California using the bootleg play for the first time in college football history. Stanford finished as Pacific Coast Conference co-champion and won the 1928 Rose Bowl against his former team, Pitt, 7-6. The 1929 season sees Warner's offense frequently using the hook and lateral play, also referred to as the hook and ladder. Its invention at times is credited to the 1982 Miami Dolphins because the NFL tries to take credit for everything. The wheel, fire, electricity, sliced bread, every offensive innovation known in the universe, the NFL invented all of that. Warner gets heavy criticism from Stanford alumni in 1932 because he keeps losing to USC. His record against USC coach Howard Jones was 2-5-1, and against his other rival, California, it was 5-3-1. Warner's Stanford tenure ends after the 1932 season, following 5 straight losses to USC. Temple is Warner's last stop as a head coach. He spends 6 years there, making it to the Sugar Bowl in 1934 and losing to Tulane. Pop Warner was the master of misdirection. He might be the most innovative coach in college football history, and that's saying a lot, but let's take a look at what he did over the course of his career. He invented the single and double wing formations. He invented the 3-point stance and the body block, where a blocker left his feet, turning and throwing his body into a defender rather than just trying to hit him with his shoulders. He invented the screen pass, the naked reverse, the bootleg, the trap play, and was one of the first to teach his quarterbacks to throw a spiral pass. Because of his background as a tinsmith, he improved football equipment. He began making shoulder and thigh pads from fiber and sold this invention to A.G. Spaulding and Brothers and continued to make money from it throughout his life. He invented the blocking sled, the favorite toy of offensive linemen throughout history, and he made improvements to the tackling dummy. The single wing was adopted by everyone and was the formation for college football up until the T formation came about in the early 1940s. The single wing is still in use today. There are many variations, including what we often call wildcat. The biggest impact Warner had on the sport of football was showing other coaches the possibilities of what could be. The misdirection plays, the trick plays, the constant pushing of the rules. Warner is single-handedly responsible for more rule changes than any other coach in history. Today, Pop Warner's name is mostly remembered because of Pop Warner football. This came about in 1929, starting as the Pop Warner Little Scholars Program. Hundreds of thousands of youth from 5 to 16 years old play organized football under Pop Warner. Glenn Scobey Warner ended up with 319 wins. Many list 318 because of discrepancies of how wins were counted early on. He would have had 18 more wins if we included his 5 seasons he coached at Iowa State while simultaneously coaching other schools. 337 wins would move him in front of Nick Saban to number 3 all time. I'm going to finish with a quote about Warner, summing up who he was as a person. From football's greatest coaches, about Warner. Pop Warner was 83 when he died on September 7, 1954 in Palo Alto, California, leaving an estate of more than $500,000. He had a great many loves: the double wing, Turkish trophy cigarettes, apple pie with butter, songwriting, and painting. He didn't mind a dram of the hard stuff now and then either. He was far from a heavy drinker, but his trainer had instructions to furnish him with a bottle of cough medicine every cold afternoon. "Wally," he would bark to his longtime trainer Wallace Denny, "hand me my cough medicine." In later years, as a retired Californian, he made his own wine. Warner was also one of the first do-it-yourself tribe. He had a woodworking shop in his garage and once made a golf club head from a broken bedpost. His theory was that a man who worked with his head for a living should work with his hands for a hobby in order to balance his life. Warner made expert use of expletives. When he arrived at Carlisle Indian School of Pennsylvania, players quit wholesale because they couldn't stand abuse from a white man. So Pop modified his language and chastised his Redskins by having them spank each other once apiece for misplays. The Indians grew to love him. Indeed, they could think of no one else who would put up with such personalities as Sweetcorn, who shot up the Cumberland Valley Railroad Depot because they wouldn't sell him a ticket after Warner had left him home on a trip, and Redwater, who had to be sat on through a 200-mile rail journey because he had a skinful and insisted on the jumping off the train just for laughs. Warner was an incredible coach and a colorful character who had the kind of life you'd make a movie about. He did so many things for so long, I could have made a series about him, and I will probably end up making more videos around him. So what do you think of Pop Warner's life? I'm interested in your thoughts. This is John Johnston with Hardcore College Football History. Thank you.